Serious, what's your ghost story? I was around 10 years old and living in San Antonio. I got back to the apartment first after school. About 5 minutes of being in the place alone, I saw on the reflection of a mirror an older man in a tuxedo was in the kitchen. I flipped out and ran to my room and grabbed a bat. I waited 10-ish minutes before coming out. I locked the door when one got home and never heard the door open for someone to leave. I didn't tell Anvone about it. Fast forward 6 years. I was watching Ghost Hunters with my family, and my mom asked if I remember the old man in the tux. Crazy stuff. My dad's story, not mine. Early 1980s, he is working a summer job at Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. One day he and his friend Mark hiked up to the top of one of the mountains. They set up their tent inside an Indian pit, a man-made hole dug out by Native Americans hundreds of years ago. The Indian pits were either used as hunting blinds or spots where young braves came to for their vision quest. Late in the night, my dad wakes up and has to use the bathroom, number 1. He crawled out of the tent, out of the pit, and went walking a respectable distance away from the tent. Suddenly he felt a hand on his shoulder pull him backwards. My dad calls out, "Hey Mark, what are you doing?" He turns around, turns on his flashlight, and there is nobody there. He shines the light at his feet, and discovers that his next couple steps would have taken him directly over a steep cliff. He did his business and hurried back to the tent. The next morning the two friends are waking up and his buddy says to him, "I know this sounds crazy, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I swear to you, there was an Indian man standing outside our tent." Whatever really happened that night, my dad is alive, he met my mom in Yellowstone, and here I am writing this story to you today. From the time I was about 12 to 17 years old, I lived in what I believe was a haunted house. I've never had experiences like I had in that house since moving out. A few specific memories come to mind. Once I was hanging up laundry in my closet. I heard someone whisper my name in my ear, clear as day. I'd never sprinted out of a room so fast. Another time my sister and I had friends over, and we decided to use a tape recorded to ask questions to the ghosts like they do on those paranormal shows. We played the tape not expecting to hear anything, and could hear a very soft voice say, "I'm in the closet." We were sitting near a small closet in the basement. My parents eventually decided to sell the house. We moved into a new place before selling this place. My sister stopped by the house after there had been a couple of showings to turn out the lights in the house. She went to turn off the lights in the basement, which had multiple light switches. One was at the far end of the basement away from the stairs. She turned off the light and swears she heard heavy footfalls of someone running towards her. She ran out of the house without turning out the rest of the lights and locked the door. That was the last time either of us went back until we were in the neighborhood and the new owners offered to show us the renovations they made. Nothing happened then, but they did ask us if we wanted to babysit their kids. We politely declined. This is my mom's story, but she's completely sane and I believe it. My parents went to South Carolina for a wedding. They stayed at some old plantation bed and breakfast spot. She was sleeping when she woke up all of a sudden. She had her cell phone plugged into the wall and was on her nightstand. There was a notification on the phone, so it was blinking. The female ghost was dressed in a full-on old formal dress, and she was fixated on the cell phone blinking light and was walking toward it. My mom said, "It's okay, it's just a phone." The ghost turned and made eye contact with my mom, then disappeared. Years ago, two friends and I were camping in fall in a small tent, staggered with two of our heads on one side and one on the other. It was a silent and still night, with fog developing in the moist PNW woods. What sounds like a muffled voice on a cell phone starts coming out from the center of the tent between all our heads. I heard someone keep asking, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" My friend asks, "Are you hearing that?" At once we all sit up and start shuffling around in the tent looking for the phone. There is no phone in the tent. Look to my friend on the other side of the tent and ask what they heard. It sounded like someone saying, "Hello. Can you hear me?" We all agree this is what we heard, and that the sound was coming from the other side of the tent. The next morning we find all our cell phones sitting in the car still, and there's no cell reception at the campground. Still sends shivers up my spine. This one time, when I was little, I was laying in bed with my right ear buried in my pillow. I am suddenly jolted awake by this roar that sounded like it was going directly into my right ear. I woke up startled and confused and began scanning my room for anything, as my mind was almost full panic mode. When I looked to my right, I saw this little boy standing next to me. He was glowing blue, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed about him actually. He looked sad and I remember feeling bad for him. After a minute I tried to lean closer to him, and even muttered out a faint "hey," but as I did he disappeared. A few days later I told this story to my mother, who then informed me that the people who owned the house before us had a son who died when he was 5 in a car accident. However, it wasn't near the house. I should also note now that our house was renovated since we moved in and a second floor was added. My current theory is that the boy finally found his way back home and realized that his old home was gone. He came to me because I was the new boy of the house. I used to work at a museum that was once a functional prison. Throughout my 8+ years working there, I have been pushed, slapped, bit, dragged and punched by unseen entities. I always had problems when I would go to lock up certain buildings at night because you never knew what you would see coming around a corner. I went into the cell house once to turn off the lights, rounded the doorway to see a full-bodied apparition standing there in an inmate's uniform. A split second later, he vanished into thin air. There was a pretty notorious inmate who was involved in one of the riots, and his spirit would follow me around the grounds. One night, I was with a paranormal group, and we went into an area that we don't let the public visit because it's in disrepair, and we were screamed at to leave and something snarled at me. It was not uncommon for me, or one of my co-workers to have shadow people follow us around, and we would even have some poor visitors chased out of certain buildings like maximum security by such entities. One have dozens of stories about that place. Whenever I get sick, I get the same nightmare over and over. Background story: my room has a bed with a metal bed frame and I am a very messy person. Anyway, so, when I get a cold or the flu, I get the same dream of a scary lady who seems to be in her 30s with very tangled black hair, fungus-covered skin, and glowing silver eyes sitting on my bed frame. I can't move and she's just sitting and watching me for hours. She never moves, just sits there. Then towards the end, she becomes me and I'm looking down at myself. Well, one time I was extremely sick and all I could really do was sleep. So, one of the times I went to sleep, I woke up in the dream or in real life, I really don't know, and a gargoyle was sitting on my chest holding me down to where I could only use my eyes to look around. I was forced to look at my closet, which was very messy, when I went to sleep, and it was exactly how I left it. The socks on the floor were exactly where I left them. The only difference was there was a 7 feet tall demon-like thing in my closet with yellow eyes, big claws, red wings with spikes and a dragon-like head. It walked closer and closer to me until woke up screaming. I told my dad about this days later, and he said he had the same dream years ago. It was creepy because we both described the demon the same way, and my mom confirmed that this was exactly how he described the demon years ago. The only difference was that in his dream the demon tried to drag him underground. My dad died a month ago very suddenly. We are native people, so we believe in the spirit world. Little weird things happened throughout the week of his funeral. After we buried my mother's and his ashes together, as they wished, we saw 3 rainbows. Remember the double rainbow guy? I was 3 times full of joy as he was. We went back to my uncle's to relax. The door to their lower patio blew open. We all looked at each other. We woke up the next morning and fresh snow had fallen. It was very early and no one would have been walking around. We saw 2 sets of footprints in the snow in a circle. This is way up north, so people aren't just walking by. What made me happy was it was 2 footprints. My dad had lost a leg in 2013. I was glad to know he had gotten it back. Here is one of my experiences that has stuck with me since I was a kid. I grew up in a house that had this creepy Indian bust of a head and shoulders, and it looked as stereotypical as you can imagine, but something was sinister about it. So for years my bedroom was just outside by this, and I swear that it watched me all the time. It wasn't a trick of the light, it wasn't my imagination, and it was real. One night I saw it looking at me. I was coming in from the movies and my parents were asleep. I saw this thing staring at me, its cold bronze looking not so much at me but right into my very soul. It fucking blinked and its mouth goddamned moved. I froze and I couldn't move and I couldn't scream. All I could do was stare back at this hideous statue looking at me till my body allowed me to move. I've never felt such malice and evil intent radiate off of anything in my entire life. Some years later my parents died and my house was sold off and I never found out what happened to that bust, but I rest a little easier knowing that it was hopefully destroyed and rotting in some landfill. My family moved into a somewhat older house on a lot of land when I was 7. We had the most wonderful arkatar at the time, a breed known for protecting its family. My dad traveled a lot, so my mom would often be home with just us 3 kids and the dog. One day we get home from wherever, and Pluto is at the top of the stairs growling. Refuses to go down there. My mom naturally feared someone had broken in, so she made me, my older brother, and my little sister go sit in the car with 10-year-old brother in the driver's seat, telling us if she wasn't back in 10 minutes to leave and find somewhere to call the police. This was before cell phones. She ventured back into the house with a knife. Came back out a few minutes later, and hadn't found anything. So we went on with our lives. Many years later, once I'd reached adulthood, my parents revealed to us that someone had previously hung himself in the unfinished portion of the basement, where the laundry room was. My poor brother's room was in that basement. When we lived in that house is when he first began to have issues. He's now deceased after many years of drug addiction. I am fairly convinced that house was haunted. I have a few, but here is one. When I was 13, I was in front of my house in Queens practicing little BMX tricks on my bike. It was about 11 p.m. when I decided to call it a night, but before I did I wanted to ride my bike along the waterfront in my neighborhood. When I completed the trail I saw a woman wearing a white gown standing in front of a tree. I stopped my bike because I saw that she had no face. I thought that it was either a mannequin, or I wasn't close enough to make out her features, so I shouted, "Hey." She didn't respond. I rode my bike towards her until I was about 10 feet away, very close, and still no face. Then her head turned toward my direction. I jetted and went home, and didn't bring it up to anyone for years. 10 years later my childhood friend saw the same woman with no face. 1 year after that our mutual friend shot himself in the head a few feet from that very spot. Do not know if this count. My mother have a sister who passed away young. PPL in my mother's side often tell story about she visit you in your dream. I am not believe in anything supernatural, so not much care being an engineer and young adult. One night, I was dreaming, yes strangely I was fully aware that I am in a dream despite have no ability to lucid dream, and this dream feel very real. It was like, I sitting in my house kitchen, I hear someone banging on the front door. I open the door and see a woman, small build, with hair done in an old-fashioned way. I could not see her face as it was blurred out. She said, in my native language, "You and your brother, go back to XXX city right now." She told me that a couple of times and then I woke up. Next morning I receive a call from my uncle, most my Martha side relative live in XXX city, that my cousin had a serious accident last night, and currently in ICU. He is okay now. When I visit my cousin, I told my uncle about that dream and he told me the woman in my dream is my great auntie who passed away. And when he showed me photos of her my jaw dropped. The women in my dream look exactly like the photo, same hair done, same frame. My mother told me the only time I meet my great auntie is when I was an infant, not even 1 year old. TLDR, I meet my auntie ghost in my dream, warn me about my big cousin's serious accident. Okay, guess it's time for my long story time post. I was 5 at the time. Just moved to FL from NJ. Lived in the back of an apartment complex and on the 3rd floor. Only my mother and I. She told me recently that every single night she'd hear noises of knocking and banging and such around the apartment. The kicker of it all that proved it. I was in my room with a vaulted ceiling and had stuffed animals on shelves way higher than I could possibly reach. I was playing in there with some toys while my mother was making dinner, and the door was wide open. Out of nowhere, the door slammed shut hard. Of course, my mother runs to my room to check on me. Apparently, I was laying in my bed, and all of the stuffed animals were in a pile in the center of my room. We took a week vacation after that. Another time of proof, my mother went for some water, or something in the middle of the night, and saw me sleepwalking around the house, and stated that I looked like I was chasing something around the house. She called out my name, and apparently I answered in a deep male voice. She then ran out of the house and didn't return till morning. Don't blame her. Still get chills thinking about this shit. There were so many more than just this. Okay, so when I was about 9 years old, I went down to the graveyard to visit my grandpa, as I often did when I was younger. My parents felt it was safe for me to walk alone, since I had my Hello Kitty phone with me and the graveyard wasn't far away from my house and my grandma's house. Plus, some of my classmates lived close by too. So I went down, I talked with my grandpa for a bit, and washed his grave, to make sure it was clean, because 9-year-old me wanted it to look nice. After about 20 minutes, I decided to go home. As I was walking, I suddenly stopped and looked over at a tree. My grandma had told me that it was there her best friend was buried. There wasn't a gravestone, but over time had a tree grown on her. I don't know what that went to my 9-year-old brain, but I decided to talk to her, like I did with my grandpa. "Hello. How are you?" was all I asked, not expecting a response. But then, it appeared. A ghost of an old lady, in her 50s. I assumed that was my grandma's best friend. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I think she said she was doing good. I stayed an extra 20 minutes, and talked to her. I can't really remember what, but possibly my grandma. The only reason why I left, was because my mom called me. I said my goodbyes to her, as she disappeared. So not really a scary story, but still a ghost story. Finally, I've got quite a few. Parents ran pubs until No was 16 and we lived in them, meaning didn't live in a house till I was 16-17. Last pub we had was haunted. Here are just a few incidents. Had things go missing for hours then turn up in previously searched places. Easy to say that's BS, but it's the tip of the iceberg. We have what's called a Welsh dresser. It's freestanding cupboards with attached shelving. The shelving sits above the cupboards at the back, and the cupboard is about 40 centimeters, just shy of 14 inches, deep. I had gifts from when I was christened on the shelves, and they would fly off, not touch the top of the cupboard, and hit the floor about a foot from the front of the thing. Our internal calling system went off when the pub was shut up for the night, and we were all upstairs. The alarm was on but did not activate. Answer to hear the phone being physically dropped. Told my dad, and we both went down to find the phone on the floor, and the fire exit open. Brother spent 30 minutes talking to the nice man in the brown coat when we first moved in. Pub was shut and locked up. The tips of our kitchen knives would all get curled over. I mean, seriously curled. As tight as when you rule up a piece of paper from the corner. About 10 years ago, I lived in a 100-year-old house. The dog and I were the only ones home. I went down to the basement to do laundry and the dog, a Lab Shepherd mix, followed along. She was just sniffing around over by the old part of the basement, as I was bent down pulling clothes out of the dryer. All of a sudden she runs full speed out of there and up the stairs. I never heard any noise, but definitely followed quickly upstairs. In the several years after that we could never get her to come down to the basement with us. She was always the type of dog that had to be at your side constantly, but refused to go down to the basement again. I think animals sense things better than us humans. Another time, maybe a couple of months after that incident, my teenage son and I along with the dog were watching TV in the living room. We heard what sounded like adult booted footsteps coming up the wooden basement steps. I was waiting for the basement door to open. Even with the TV on, we both heard it at the same time. The dog even lifted her head and listened. Nothing happened, but freaked us out a bit. Residual haunting is what I think it was. Creepy though. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this one.